The fall. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Wren Ashford smoothed down her second-hand dress for the third time in 10 minutes. The navy blue fabric, though carefully pressed, couldn't hide the fact that it had seen better years. Around her, colleagues glided past in designer gowns and tailored suits, their laughter mixing with the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Wren pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to quiet its persistent rumbling. She'd skipped lunch again today and breakfast, if she was being honest. The choice between a proper meal and keeping the electricity on at her grandmother's house wasn't really a choice at all. Besides, there would be hors d'oeuvres at the gala. She just had to make it through the presentations first. "Looking a bit pale there, Ashford," sneered Janet Morrison from accounting, her voice carrying just enough for nearby colleagues to hear. "Hope you didn't spend too much on that dress." Heat crept up Wren's neck as she forced a polite smile. "Just tired from the campaign prep," she managed, though the words felt thick on her tongue. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and she gripped the back of a nearby chair. The quarterly presentations had begun, with department heads taking turns at the podium to showcase their achievements. Wren tried to focus on the numbers dancing across the projection screen, but they kept blurring together. Her marketing coordinator position meant she'd be presenting the junior staff contribution soon, a 3-minute segment she'd rehearsed dozens of times. When her name was called, Wren stood on unsteady legs. The walk to the stage felt endless, each step requiring tremendous effort. She was vaguely aware of whispers following her path, of concerned glances from some colleagues and amused smirks from others. Reaching the microphone, Wren cleared her throat and began her presentation. The words came automatically, muscle memory from countless practice sessions in her tiny apartment mirror. But halfway through discussing their social media engagement rates, the room began to spin violently. The last thing she remembered was the gasps from the audience as her knees buckled. The microphone stand seemed to rush toward her as darkness claimed her vision. She hit the stage with a soft thud that echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. In the scattered moments of semi-consciousness that followed, Wren was dimly aware of voices, some concerned, others clearly entertained by the unexpected drama. Someone mentioned calling an ambulance. Another voice worried about the embarrassment to the company. But through it all, one voice cut through the chaos with quiet authority, commanding immediate attention and respect. Though she couldn't see him through her haze, she felt strong arms lifting her with surprising gentleness, carrying her away from the whispers and stares. For the first time in months, despite her mortification, Wren felt completely safe. The rescue Damon Blackwood had built his reputation on making swift, calculated decisions under pressure. In boardrooms across the country, his name was synonymous with ruthless efficiency and unwavering control. But as he knelt beside the collapsed figure on his company's stage, something stirred in him that had nothing to do with corporate protocols. "Give her some space," he commanded, his voice cutting through the crowd's anxious murmur. The authority in his tone sent employees stepping back immediately, though their curious stares lingered. "Someone get Dr. Phillips from the medical suite. Now." Wren's face was pale as porcelain, her breathing shallow but steady. Damon had noticed her earlier in the evening, not because she stood out, but because she'd seemed so determined to blend in. He'd watched her clutch that chair, seen the tremor in her hands as she'd approached the podium. He should have intervened then. "Sir, the ambulance is on its way," his assistant Marcus whispered, appearing at his shoulder with characteristic efficiency. "Cancel it," Damon said quietly, carefully sliding his arms beneath Wren's slight frame. "We'll handle this privately." The weight of her was almost nothing, and that concerned him more than he cared to admit. As he lifted her, her head lolled against his shoulder and he caught the faint scent of lavender soap. Something simple and honest that seemed at odds with the expensive perfumes surrounding them. "Is that really appropriate?" Janet Morrison's voice carried from somewhere behind him, dripping with false concern. "I mean the optics of the CEO carrying a junior employee." Damon's jaw tightened, but he didn't turn around. "Ms. Morrison, perhaps you'd be more useful ensuring our guests are comfortable while we handle this medical emergency." The ice in his voice could have frozen the champagne fountain. He carried Wren through the service corridors, away from prying, eyes to the small medical suite his company maintained for events. Dr. Phillips was already there, having been summoned from the party, and immediately began checking Wren's vitals. Blood pressure's low, pulses weak but regular, the doctor murmured, examining her with professional efficiency. When did she last eat? I don't know, Damon replied, though something in his chest tightened at the implication. He found himself studying Wren's face more closely, the slight hollowness in her cheeks, the dark circles beneath her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Looks like exhaustion combined with low blood sugar, Dr. Phillips diagnosed. She needs rest, proper nutrition, and probably a few days off work. Nothing serious, but her body's telling her to slow down. As if summoned by the doctor's words, Wren's eyelids fluttered open. For a moment she seemed disoriented, her gaze darting around the unfamiliar room before landing on Damon. Her eyes widened in recognition and mortification. Mr. Blackwood? She whispered, attempting to sit up. Oh God, the presentation, I'm so sorry. Easy, he said, his hand instinctively moving to her shoulder to keep her still. The gesture was gentler than anything his employees had ever seen from him. The presentation doesn't matter. How are you feeling? Embarrassed, she admitted, her cheeks flushing with color that was actually reassuring to see. I've ruined everything. The gala, your event. You've ruined nothing, Damon said firmly. These things happen. The important thing is making sure you're all right. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully, as if seeing him for the first time. Gone was the distant, intimidating CEO she'd glimpsed in elevators and board meetings. This man's eyes held genuine concern, and his presence felt protective rather than threatening. Thank you, she said softly. For helping me. Damon nodded, surprised by how much her simple gratitude affected him. We're going to make sure you get home safely. And Wren? She looked up at him questioningly. Take tomorrow off. Doctor's orders. The Discovery Vera Hartwell had been Wren's closest friend since their first day at Meridian Corporation 3 years ago, bonding over shared coffee breaks and mutual bewilderment at office politics. As the company's HR representative, Vera had a keen eye for reading between the lines, and lately, she'd been worried sick about her friend. The morning after the gala, Vera knocked on Wren's apartment door with a bag of groceries and a determined expression. She'd noticed the weight loss, the increasingly threadbare clothes, the way Wren had started declining lunch invitations, but seeing her collapse in front of 200 people had been the final straw. You're not getting rid of me until we talk, Vera announced when Wren opened the door, looking pale but rested. And don't even think about saying you're fine. Wren's small apartment told its own story. The furniture was sparse but clean, with a stack of medical bills visible on the kitchen counter despite Wren's attempt to hide them. The refrigerator hummed loudly, and Vera noticed it was practically empty except for a carton of milk and some wilted lettuce. Wren, Vera said softly, setting down the groceries. Why didn't you tell me how bad things had gotten? The question broke something in Wren's carefully maintained facade. Tears she'd been holding back for months finally spilled over as she sank onto her second-hand couch. I couldn't. You have your own life, your own problems. I didn't want to be a burden. A burden? Vera sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Honey, friends don't burden each other. They help. Now tell me what's really going on. Through halting words, the whole story emerged. Wren's grandmother had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia 6 months ago. The treatments weren't covered by her basic insurance, and Wren had been quietly paying for specialized care, medications, and a part-time aide. Her own salary barely covered the basics, let alone the mounting medical expenses. I've been skipping meals to make the budget work, Wren admitted. I thought I could handle it. Grandma Rose raised me after my parents died. She's all the family I have left. I can't let her down. Meanwhile, across town in his corner office, Damon found himself unable to concentrate on quarterly reports. Dr. Phillips had been discreet about the details, but the phrase malnourishment due to financial stress kept echoing in his mind. He'd built his career on knowing everything about his company, yet he'd somehow missed that one of his employees was struggling this badly. "Marcus," he called to his assistant, "I need Ren Ashford's employee file. Everything. Salary history, performance reviews, emergency contacts." "Sir?" Marcus looked confused. "Is this about last night's incident?" "Just get me the file," Damon said, his tone brooking no argument. The information painted a picture that made his chest tight with an unfamiliar emotion. Ren's performance had been exemplary for 3 years, with consistent praise from supervisors. Her salary was competitive for her level, but still modest. Her emergency contact was listed as Rose Ashford, grandmother, with an address in the city's assisted living district. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Vera Hartwell stood in his doorway, looking unusually nervous for someone who regularly dealt with executive-level personnel issues. "Mr. Blackwood, I was hoping to speak with you about Ren Ashford, privately." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I was just reviewing her file. Is there something I should know?" Vera took a breath, clearly weighing her words carefully. "Ren would kill me if she knew I was here, but someone needs to advocate for her. She's been supporting her grandmother's medical care for months. The woman has dementia, and the costs—" She trailed off, studying his expression. "She's been paying for it herself?" "Every penny. She's been skipping meals, wearing the same clothes, doing whatever it takes to make sure her grandmother gets proper care. Last night wasn't just exhaustion, Mr. Blackwood. She's been slowly starving herself to afford her grandmother's medications." Damon felt something shift inside him, a protective instinct he'd never experienced in a professional context. "What does she need?" "A raise would help, but she's too proud to ask. Maybe flexible hours so she can visit more often without using sick days. And—" Vera hesitated. "She needs to know that someone cares about her well-being, not just her productivity." Vera left his office. Damon stared out his window at the city below, seeing it differently than he had that morning. Somewhere out there, Ren was probably worrying about returning to work, about the whispers and judgment from colleagues. She had no idea that her quiet sacrifice had touched something deep in the heart of a man who'd forgotten he had one. The understanding. 3 days after the gala, Damon Blackwood did something he'd never done in his 8 years as CEO. He made an unscheduled house call to an employee's home. The modest neighborhood was a 40-minute drive from his penthouse, filled with small houses that had seen better decades but were maintained with obvious pride. Ren's address led him to a pale yellow bungalow with a well-tended garden. Before he could second-guess his decision, the front door opened to reveal an elderly man with kind eyes and silver hair, leaning on a wooden cane. "You must be the young man from Ren's work," Edmund Ashford said with a gentle smile. "She mentioned someone had been particularly kind during her episode." "Edmund Ashford?" Damon extended his hand. "I'm Damon Blackwood. I wanted to check on Ren's recovery." Edmund's handshake was firm despite his age. "She's resting in the garden, been fretting about returning to work, worried she's lost your respect." He studied Damon with the shrewd gaze of a man who'd spent decades reading people. "You know, she's mentioned you before. Always spoke of you with admiration, though I suspect she thought you barely knew she existed." "I'm learning. I was more oblivious than I should have been," Damon admitted. Edmund led him through the small house past family photographs and well-worn furniture that spoke of a life filled with love rather than luxury. "My Ren has always carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. After her parents died in that car accident when she was 16, she became the caretaker. First for her grandmother Rose, now for me since Rose passed last month." Damon stopped walking. "Passed? But I thought—" "Ah." Edmund's expression grew sad. "Ren hasn't told anyone at work yet. She's been grieving alone, still paying off Rose's final medical bills. That girl, she loved her grandmother so fiercely, spent every spare moment and penny trying to buy more time with her." They found Ren in the small backyard garden, sitting on a wooden bench among rose bushes that were clearly tended with devotion. She looked up in surprise as they approached, color draining from her face when she saw Damon. "Mr. Blackwood, I wasn't expecting, I was planning to return to work tomorrow." "Please, don't get up," Damon said, settling on the bench beside her while Edmund excused himself to make tea. "I came to see how you were feeling and to apologize." "Apologize?" Ren looked genuinely confused. "For what?" "For not noticing that one of my employees was struggling. For creating a work environment where you felt you couldn't ask for help." He turned to face her fully. "Vera told me about your grandmother. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry you felt you had to handle it alone." Tears welled in Ren's eyes. "She was everything to me. When my parents died, she took me in without question. Worked extra shifts at the diner to pay for my college. I couldn't let her spend her final months in some state facility." "Tell me about her," Damon said softly. For the next hour, Ren shared stories of Rose Ashford, her terrible cooking, her stubborn independence, her fierce love for old movies and crossword puzzles. As she talked, her face came alive with warmth and laughter, and Damon found himself captivated by her resilience and capacity for love. "She used to say that strength isn't about never falling down," Ren said, touching one of the rose blooms. "It's about who helps you back up and what you do with that second chance." "She sounds like a wise woman," Damon said, "and she raised someone extraordinary." Ren looked at him in surprise. "I'm nothing special, just someone trying to do right, by the people I love." "That's exactly what makes you special," he replied, meaning every word. Edmund returned with tea and stories of his own. Tales of his 40 years as a high school teacher, of the students who'd stayed in touch, of the small moments that had made his career meaningful. As the afternoon wore on, Damon found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, about the pressure of inheriting his father's company so young, about the loneliness that came with success, about dreams he'd set aside in pursuit of profit margins. "You know," Edmund said as the sun began to set, "Rose always said the best people are the ones who know how to see beyond themselves. Seems to me you both have that gift." As Damon prepared to leave, Ren walked him to his car. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he replied, surprising himself with the honesty. "Ren, when you're ready to return to work, we need to discuss some changes. Better support, flexible scheduling, a promotion that reflects your real value to the company." "You don't need to." "I do," he interrupted gently. "But more than that, I'd like to keep visiting. If you'd be comfortable with that. Your grandfather is fascinating, and you—" He paused, searching for words that felt adequate. "You make me remember what really matters." As he drove back to his empty penthouse, Damon realized that something fundamental had shifted in his world. For the first time in years, success felt less important than connection, profit less vital than purpose. And at the center of that transformation was a young woman whose quiet strength had somehow become the beacon he'd never known he was searching for. The beginning, 2 months later, the Riverside Community Center buzzed with the cheerful chaos of children's laughter and elderly voices sharing stories. Ren moved between the tables with practiced ease, helping seniors with their art projects, while keeping an eye on the after-school program in the adjacent room. This place had become her sanctuary, a way to honor Rose's memory while building something meaningful for others. "Mrs. Patterson, your watercolor is beautiful," she said, admiring the elderly woman's painting of a sunset. "Rose would have loved the way you captured the light." She didn't notice Damon standing in the doorway watching her work with a soft smile. Over the past weeks, their friendship had deepened through evening visits with Edmund, shared dinners, and long walks through the city. He'd kept his promise about workplace changes, too. Ren now held the position of senior marketing coordinator with a substantial raise and flexible hours that allowed her to volunteer here 3 times a week. "There's our girl," Edmund said, approaching with his cane and a proud grin. He'd become a regular fixture at the community center, teaching a weekly literature class that had quickly become the most popular offering. "Grandpa Ed," called 10-year-old Marcus, not to be confused with Damon's assistant, running over to show Edmund his latest drawing. Look what I made for Miss Wren. The drawing showed stick figures in a garden, with crooked flowers and a sun. That took up half the page. It's you and your roses, Marcus explained to Wren. Because you're always happy when you talk about them. It's perfect, Wren said, kneeling to his level. Thank you, sweetie. This is going on my refrigerator. Actually, came a familiar voice from behind her. I was hoping it might go on your new office wall instead. Wren turned to find Damon approaching with a bouquet of yellow roses, the same variety that grew in her backyard. The sight of him here, in her world of community service and quiet joy, made her heart skip in a way she was still learning to accept. What new office? She asked, accepting the flowers with a blush that didn't go unnoticed by the watching seniors. The one that comes with your promotion to marketing director, Damon said, his eyes twinkling. That is, if you're interested in leading the company's new community outreach division. Wren stared at him in shock. Community outreach? Someone recently taught me that a company's real success should be measured by how it serves its community, he said, glancing meaningfully at Edmund. I thought you might be the perfect person to head up our charitable initiatives, partner with organizations like this one, make sure we're doing real good in the world. The room had gone quiet, with residents and children alike sensing something important happening. Vera appeared from the kitchen area. She'd started volunteering here too, with a knowing smile and a tissue ready for Wren's inevitable tears. I don't know what to say, Wren whispered. Say yes to the job, Damon said, stepping closer. And then, if you're feeling generous. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and the room erupted in excited whispers. Say yes to something else entirely. Wren's hands flew to her mouth as he dropped to one knee right there among the art supplies and craft projects. Mrs. Patterson started crying immediately, and Marcus let out a loud, wow, that made everyone laugh. Wren Ashford, Damon said, his voice steady but his eyes bright with emotion. You taught me that real strength comes from love, not power. That success means nothing without someone to share it with. That the most important moments happen not in boardrooms, but in gardens and community centers, surrounded by the people who matter most. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a diamond surrounded by tiny yellow sapphires. You fell down once, and when I helped you up, you changed everything about how I see the world. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life falling more in love with your beautiful heart? Through her tears, Wren looked around the room at all the faces watching with hopeful anticipation. Edmund beaming with pride, Vera bouncing on her toes, the children wide-eyed with excitement, the seniors dabbing their eyes with tissues. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. The community center exploded in cheers and applause as Damon slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her. It was a kiss that tasted of new beginnings and promises kept, of strength found in vulnerability and love discovered in the most unexpected places. You know, Edmund said later as they all celebrated with cake from the center's kitchen. Rose always said the best love stories start with someone falling down and the right person helping them back up. Damon wrapped his arms around Wren from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they watched children play and seniors share stories. Then this is definitely the best love story I know, he murmured against her ear. Wren leaned back against his chest, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Sometimes falling down was exactly what you needed to do to find your way to where you truly belonged. And sometimes the person who catches you turns out to be the one you were meant to fall in love with all along. In a room full of laughter and new hope, surrounded by community and chosen family, their story was just beginning.